So thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Is this good? I always tell this one particular story and before I give my little show and tell, and I don't know if I told it when I gave this lecture here many years ago, but if I did, I'm telling it again. It's a story by Borges, the Argentinian writer, and the title of the story is The Aleph. I have read it so many times and I've told it so many times that I've made it my own, and I've changed the characters. So when you read, if you go to read this story, which I would suggest you do, it's a really beautiful story, an extraordinary story. You will see that I have totally changed it to make it say the things that I want it to say. But in any case, the narrative goes that Borges is a young writer in Buenos Aires, and he's up and coming, he's sort of in the news, he's emerging. And he falls in love with a very beautiful woman whose name is Beatrice. And Beatrice is a socialite, she's wealthy, she's gorgeous, and he is absolutely obsessed by her. Beatrice is not that interested in him. She's not really an intellectual, and she finds him sort of boring, and he's just not cool. But he cannot stop thinking about her and desiring her, and as the years go on, the intensity of his desire becomes more and more and more intense. After a number of years, she dies tragically, and then his desire and his obsession grows even more intense. And so every year on the anniversary of her death, he meets with her cousin, who I have named Daniele. And Borges meets with Daniele so that he can find out just a little bit more about Beatrice. Just a teeny bit, anything will do, any little tidbit. And Daniele meets with Borges because Daniele is a so-called poet and a writer, and he wants to discuss literature and poetry. Borges thinks of Daniele as a kind of hack, but he puts up with it. So about 10 years into this kind of funereal dinner, Daniele says to Borges, "I have a secret in my basement. I've never told anyone, and I want to share it with you." And he tells Borges to go down into the basement and to lie at the bottom of the stairs and to wait. And Borges does it, and he's feeling it's dark and it's dirty and it's smelly and it's wet, and he's getting very paranoid as he's lying down there, and he's feeling really stupid about it. And then suddenly what he sees in the darkness is what he calls a kind of tear in the universe. And in that tear, he sees everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. And it's the most extraordinary thing. And Borges goes on for pages listing all the things he sees. It's really, seriously, I would definitely read it. I can't even tell you all the things that he details. But of course he sees Beatrice lying in her grave, and he sees to the far reaches of the universe. And what he sees is almost like a hologram in which everything is there somehow. It's the most magical thing. And he's astounded, and he's speechless, and he just doesn't know what to do with this. So he runs up the stairs, and he's tearing out of the house, and I mean, he just, he's dumbfounded. And a couple weeks later, Daniele calls and says that the restaurant next door is expanding, and they're going to tear down Daniele's house, and they're going to destroy the Aleph. And Borges thinks, and Daniele says, you have to go to the press. You have to tell them, because they're going to destroy my secret, and this is so extraordinary. Borges thinks about it, and he's jealous. And he doesn't really want to help Daniele. And so he doesn't. And so the house is destroyed, the basement is destroyed. And at the end of the story, Borges is sort of ruminating on this, and he says, well, it turns out that Daniele, about a year after the destruction of this marvelous thing in the basement, Daniele publishes this amazing poem. And it is so phenomenal. Borges is sort of wiped off the plate, so to speak, and Daniele is the genius, the literary genius, and so it goes. And Borges, at the end, he says, he's ruminating, and he says, the years are beginning to wear away. They're beginning to wear away what he saw in that basement. And they're beginning, finally, to wear away the memory of Beatrice. So I love this story for lots of different reasons, and as the years have gone by, it means more and more to me. But one of the things I think about is that Borges, who loved literature and loved literary history, was really thinking about how he could compare to Dante. And he's looking back at all these different sort of historical figures that were his, his touchstones. And every artist, I think, has those artists that they both adore and they also want to beat. They want to be as good as or better. And Borges is coming to the conclusion that he will never be Dante. But he's also thinking about this kind of tear in the universe. And originally, when I read the story, I thought, if I could just make this just little tear, just this little rip, if I could just do something or build something or think something that had never quite been thought that way before, that's what I would want to do. And so it consistently obsesses me that is this next piece going to be the one that does it? Is this next piece going to be the one that just pushes the discourse, that is just really kind of makes that tear? Well, maybe that's never going to happen, but that's the reason why I get up every day, no matter what, and try again. And then finally, there's this idea, of course, one falls in love, probably, in my case, repeatedly and badly. However, I never learned my lesson, I think. But I think that it's a way of certainly getting that serotonin going, for sure. And it's a way of sort of energizing these obsessions, energizing. It's this sort of engine of creativity, I think, I believe, I seriously believe that. And then there's also this notion of making a kind of, for me, an image that is not a specific image. It's not an absolute, you can say, oh, that's a chair, or that's a flower, or that's a this. It's a kind of generic image. It's a kind of seed image. And maybe it's a little iconic, but it contains its beginnings, it contains its sort of what it is in the present, and it suggests something else. But it is not, it's never that specific literal image or thing. And generally speaking, I would say that you can't exactly say what it is when you look at a piece of my work. You can say it's architectural, it has an architectural vocabulary, you can say, yes, those are stairs or whatever, but you can't precisely say, oh, it is this thing, in the way that you can look at, for instance, a Jeff Koons and say, it is that balloon dog. So that notion of that something that sort of holds it is in a state of becoming, and it hasn't quite settled itself down. It's always sort of transforming itself, is something that I aim for. All right, and so I'm going to go fast through these images because we're all used to being sort of hit with a lot of stuff. So now, and digesting it very fast. And I hate those artists that go on and on and on about what they did. Okay, I'm going to just do it like this. This is a medical center in Cincinnati, and I had a commission for making a piece of sculpture. It's a medical center that does a lot of kind of high-tech investigations. And I become very enamored by the notion of something that kind of looks like a tornado or looks like a whirlpool. And there are certain images that started at the very beginning of my work, and they keep coming back up over years and years and years, but they're a little bit different each time. And so this sort of tornadic kind of whirling movement is something that I'm very much involved in right now. And I'm also thinking of something that is both energetic and dynamic and celebratory, but it's also a little, I wouldn't say the word is cruel, but I like things that kind of have a double edge. They're not exactly totally peaceful, let's say. I'm not really into peaceful things. And this notion of turbulence, I probably trust turbulence a lot more than I trust balance, for instance. I'm not really that happy when something feels really balanced and harmonious. I like it when things feel like they're about to take off, or they're they're tenuously anchored to the ground. And so this piece is about 20 feet tall. And usually what I do is, and I think it was finished last fall, some of these things feel like they go on and on and on in a painful kind of way. But a lot of times people want to know how it happens. And how it happens is, it's at this point very high tech. I have a really marvelous computer assistant, and we will sit down and I'll start looking at tornadoes and throwing images of tornadoes and things like that at him, and then we will start designing it on the computer, and we'll come up with a rendering, and then we'll propose the series of renderings and sort of put it in the environment that it's going to be, and then if it's accepted, we have to figure out a way to build it. And then we go about these things a lot the way an architect would. It gets analyzed very specifically, and something like this would have been unraveled, and I'm not showing you the unraveling in this case, but this is the underlying structure. It would have been engineered, and then all of those ribbons of aluminum would have been unraveled. They would have been placed on plates, large plates of aluminum, and run through. They would have been water jet cut, and they would have been given, we would develop, or we do develop, all sorts of drawings that show how things are going to be cut and then how things are going to be curved. And there's really, past a certain point, all of the messing around and making decisions, a lot of them are done. I might spend days saying, move it like this, change it like this, but it's all being done in the computer. I might spend days sort of ruminating and driving everybody crazy and making them, throw this out and try this. But once I settle on something, once I'm committed, it's really difficult to change, and I don't want to change. I'm kind of committed. And then, basically, I want it to be built exactly the way I said it's supposed to be built, the way I have sort of come to understand it. And I get to understand it by looking at it in every possible way in the computer. Which is not to say that there isn't something marvelous about making maquettes, and there isn't something fabulous and absolutely different making the real thing. But I have become very, and maybe from the very beginning, I basically work more like an architect than I do like somebody who's sort of, once I've designed it, it's more like an architect, the way I work. Now, I get inspiration from all sorts of things, and Leonardo was probably my Dante in a certain way. That's the person that, for me, one of the people that made, and I have many, who made a tear in the universe. But what I really like about Leonardo is his curiosity. There is nothing that's taboo. There's nothing he won't think about. There's nothing that he won't go, I wonder why that does what it does or looks the way it looks. So one of my sources of inspiration was the Deluge Series by Leonardo. And again, it's sort of like when everything feels peaceful, I say to myself, when is the next tornado going to happen? I'm much more comfortable when I'm in the middle of the turbulence than when I'm in the middle of this sort of static, peaceful situation. So naturally, Leonardo's Deluge series would interest me. The other sort of tear in the universe for me is the Tatlin Tower and Monument to the Third International. For me, this was another real sort of quantum leap. And I think for every architect, and I won't speak for every sculptor, but certainly for every architect who works in the 20th or the 21st century, this is a source. It's under construction. It is no longer, it looks like it's under construction, it looks like it's industrial, it looks like the Tower of Babel, but it's a Tower of Babel that has been put on the diagonal and looks like it's no longer balanced. It's about ready to take off. And you can find just about everything you need, at least I need, in this particular piece. And I love every time I see it remade. Now, another thing, I sort of troll the internet. Some people troll the internet looking for pornography. I have to admit, I do not. And I don't know why, I just do not. But I do troll it looking for images that I can steal. And what I really enjoy is sort of, typing in a word and seeing what comes up. I think it's just extraordinary. It used to be I'd have to go to the library and do that. Now I can sit at home and do it, up to a point. And then basically they have not scanned every marvelous book in the library, so I still feel I have to go to the bookstore and buy more books. But in the meantime, while I'm watching some horrible TV show to take my mind off all my troubles, like Snapped, I am trolling the internet looking for tornadoes and hurricanes and things like that. So here we have one of the hurricanes that I would have used as a source. And then another one of my favorite sources is, I call him the Blue Man. He's actually Wind, and it's a medieval manuscript. And I remember, 8 or 9 years ago, I was sitting somewhere feeling rather tumultuous, and this image came up for me, and I thought, I want to make that hair someday. I want to see what that hair looks like. And so, and he is called, I believe this is the wind. It's the god of the wind coming in. And then anything and everything is grist for my mill, but fashion and ruffles and lace and high collars and all sorts of anything that, whether it's high or low, if it strikes my fancy, I will use it, and then I'll try to transform it. So I might transform her sort of petticoat and these curves and ribbons and rolls into some huge steel ribbon, and basically I have. But one of the things I like about fabric and the way people make clothes, it's very much akin to the way we bend metal, because what we will do is lay it out like a pattern and then roll it. And of course, fabric, it's so much easier with fabric. It will bend to your wishes. And a lot of times, high fashion that is unwearable is great sculpture, I've found. So this is a scattering of particles in a cloud chamber, and I've looked at this image forever and tried to think, well, what would this be like on a large scale? And what I like is also the randomness and the haphazardness of it all, and that you can't take it all in at once, and you have to go back and keep looking at it, and it feels chaotic. Now, basically, we know that chaos is really just another form of order. But whatever that form of order is what I'm interested in. I'm also love amusement parks, and I grew up around Hershey Park. My dad, when everything got a little rough in the house, we'd go to Hershey Park and get on some rides and kind of get rid of our frustrations, as it were. And so I hung out a lot on, the roller coasters and the Super Duper Looper and Super Duper Loopers. Maybe I've missed one here. At any rate, I guess the Super Duper Looper is going to come up later. So when I went to do Park Avenue, which was up on Park Avenue from March through July of last year, many of the things that I've been showing you and the images and the things I'm thinking about, this kind of wind turbulence, was the idea I brought to Park Avenue. And I designed the pieces very much for that specific site, and photographed the site, and then went back to the computer and looked at each, almost like I did it like a visual narrative, so that you went from one to the next to the next to the next. You could read it going uptown, downtown, but each piece sort of spoke to the other and had a kind of up and down movement, but it was all about a certain kind of wind. And so this shows you 52nd to 57th Street, and then I stuck one more way uptown. And this is called Maelstrom, and it's about 70 feet long, and it's made up of these turbine-like forms, which some people see as very flower-like. I see them as turbine-like. And vortexes of movement and turbines are very much sources for me. I really like jet engines and fans and wind, things that generate wind. And so this was the first one, if you were going uptown, and I consider myself a downtowner who goes uptown. So this was in front of the Seagram's building. And I wanted it to feel like it was very haphazard and tumbling, and almost as though there's paper. It was called Park Avenue Paper Chase. And though this paper was blowing up the avenue, and it would create, the wind would create the forms, and it would also sort of leave them like a confetti sort of parade, and leave the debris and scatter it up the avenue. And now this is, these pieces were made not all at once, and a portion of Maelstrom was made earlier in the year and installed at Longhouse out in East Hampton. And so the pieces actually do go other places than Park Avenue, and they fit into the landscape in a garden area nicely, I have to say, and they are for sale if anyone's interested. If you want one in your garden, I'd be happy to drop one off. Tomorrow, as a matter of fact. But anyway, this shows you how we laid out the patterns on all these plates of aluminum. And they're cut sheets, so that we knew exactly how much aluminum had to be ordered or bought, and then how it was going to be cut. I think it was water jet cut, I'm not sure. And then what happened is it all had to be, then we made other patterns, and it all had to be rolled back up again and curved to exactly the curvature and the radiuses that we had drawn, and then welded and intersected and all of that. And this is another one called Hoopla. It maybe is my favorite, and part of the reason why it is because it is a little gawky, I think, and it's the most architectural, and it changes all the time. From every point of view, it's slightly different. And they're all different from every point of view, but this one even more so, it kind of folds in on itself. This is twin vortex. And so each piece up the avenue, sort of, some things were a little more slower and more static than others. And I really wanted it to have a kind of emotional movement. It's all white because I wanted to catch the light very much. I wanted you to see all the shadows. And I don't usually use a lot of color, or I'm very careful about the color I do use. For whatever reason. This is called Waltzing Matilda, and it was taken actually from a big origami dress, well, a small origami dress made into a very large piece. This is fiberglass, and it was really hard to make. And these are some of the drawings for each of the sections. One section went in another section and another section. It was really nail-biting. I thought it was going to collapse on itself at the last moment, and it was shipped all the way from Jacksonville, Florida, on a, if you want to know all these things, wide load, and all that stuff. So what begins to happen for me, like it or not, I mean, I would rather dream up these things and then not construction manage, but I have to, and I try to not get absorbed in every little detail, but it always comes back to bite me if I don't. And I also have a great team of people who have given me their lifeblood and suffered and now are telling me how much of their lifeblood they've given me. But it couldn't happen without like these extraordinary people that work for me and really do, you know, give me more than they should and charge me a lot less than they should, and now they're telling me that too, but at any rate. And this was Cyclone Twist, which is about 27 feet tall and was at 57th Street. Cyclone Twist was made first, and it went over to England, to Sotheby's Sculpture Park and at Chatsworth. And it's not for auction, it's for an exhibition. And so you can see how it looks in probably one of the most beautiful sculpture parks in the world. Nothing looks bad at Chatsworth, I have to say. Nothing. I don't care how bad the art is, it all looks good once it's there. But this piece particularly, it was really, you know, it really worked there. So way down back in 1971, and I really will try to go fast now, but we are starting back in 1971 at 112 Green Street, which is just down the street. I was allowed to do a piece, my first real sculpture in New York, called Sand Fans. And if any of you know about 112, it was the artist-run kind of co-op. There were no galleries in Soho like there are none now, but Soho wasn't Soho. And all great group of artists got together and they would do work and get shows, and it was a marvelous sort of mixture of music and performance and dance and painting and sculpture. And I was very much into process and movement, and so I set up 4 industrial fans on a big pile of sand and let it blow around. The fans were just as important. I realized I show this piece because it really is the beginning of my obsession with wind and blades and turbines and movement. And this is the sort of grimy basement that 112 was at that time. And I don't know if anybody knows Catherine Bigelow. She's a filmmaker. She was wandering around at that point. I think she was about 23 in her T-shirt. You know, and well, there were just so many people there. Phil Glass, Rauschenberg, Gordon Matta, George Trakas, Susie Harris. I mean, it was just an extraordinary, Susan Rothenberg, an extraordinary time. So we set up the piece again many, many years later, 40 years later, and it looks a lot cleaner, but it's the same effect, and there are guards on the fans now. And then did it in Dubai at an art fair and sold it. So we sold it 40 years later. And that's a little bit of a, you know, you never know, so don't throw anything out. That's the only thing I can say. You never, ever know. So this kind of obsession with blades and Cuisinarts and fans and turbines. In the 80s, I built a big machine called 1001 Nights in the Mansion of Bliss for a large, down again on Lafayette Street in it was a big sort of industrial space, about 80 feet long and 30 feet high. And I just really went to town. Now, and there's a little bit of amusement park architecture, all kinds of things. And then this piece went to Europe, and it traveled around Europe. And each place that it went, I added something and took something out. But I really wanted this machine, and I thought of it as kind of a machine that creates, it's about technology, and it's about machines that can be both let's say they give you something, they're creative, but they're also destructive. And it seems that all technology has that aspect. It's not all wonderful and it's not all terrible. And a lot of technology comes out of war. So the pieces that I make are often my ruminations about things that maybe have nothing to do with art to begin with, or something to do with art, but also other things like, what is the nature of invention? What is the nature of technology? What does war look like? Why do people make wars? War strategies can be really beautiful, and I've made art out of, I've used them as compositional systems because I think they're extraordinary. And the other thing I like about war strategies is they're very organized. You know, they're, you know, you figure it all out, you've got this plan, and then you go to war and all chaos breaks out. And so, but it's done again and again and again. And so this is a piece. There's a lot of proposals that never make it. And this was generated from that diagram. It never made it, but again, it has this big sort of whirling machine that came out of an arena. I think Frank Stella won this one. He always wins whenever I'm competing with him. Always, always. And he won't talk to me either when we're in elevators. He just won't even say hi. It really bothers me. The least he could do is say, "Hey, Alice, I won, huh, again." But anyway, doesn't do it, old Frank. But I mean, I do like his work. So what happens sometimes is, as another way of thinking, I make drawings, and I make drawings because I don't win a lot of these competitions, but I like the ideas, so I can hold on to them as drawings, and because I like to draw, and because it becomes my world, and it's not just the world of how much is it gonna cost to build this thing, and you know, do I have to truck it with a wide load, and all those very stressful things. I can just be in the studio and draw and think and paint my watercolors. And so that is something I really love to do. This is the East River. It looks like like a super duper looper. And that was what it was taken from. It's now been painted. So it really pops. After 20 years, I finally figured it out. And I don't have pictures of it painted, but if you happen to go on the FDR, you'll see it. Nashville, Tennessee, and often, now what's really interesting to me is that I've been building these pieces all over the place for a long time. But if you do it on Park Avenue, you are suddenly back in the game, okay? So, so you know, like, I don't know. I mean, this is Nashville, Tennessee. That was even the East River and all sorts of it. But, you know, it's a really interesting thing about strategy or about being where you need to be with something. And I love New York, and I would never leave New York, but it's a really hard town. And what's very curious to me is that it's like Park Avenue, now I'm back, so to speak. Maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for 10. But there are all these other pieces that are scattered all over the place, and in a way, they don't even matter. The only thing that mattered, in a strange kind of way, was Park Avenue. There's a kind of irony to that, but really and truly, it ultimately doesn't really bother me because I'm still making proposals for things all over the place that aren't Park Avenue. So. This is Nashville, Tennessee, and usually I try to work with the context. And in Tennessee, it was a music town, but they didn't want another guitar. They wanted something else. And so there's the stadium that you can see in the distance, and then there were a lot of bridges across the river. And before the stadium happened, it was a kind of industrial park where they used to launch boats. And so this was an old crane, a sort of abutment that I put the piece on. It existed up there on those concrete pedestals, so to speak. And then I wanted to speak to the bridges and speak to trusses, but I also wanted it, and this is a really large piece. It's about 120 feet in the air. And I wanted it to feel like they had fallen and they were sort of caught in the moment. And those thin sort of poles caught them and held them in tension. We did use New York engineers, and some of the most talented people in the world are in New York City, which is another reason why I love it. You can call up just about anybody and say, I have this idea, would you give me a break on the engineering and not charge me much of anything because it's kind of interesting, would you do this for me? And sometimes it happens, So another thing that interested me was I saw, when I was trolling the internet, I saw starlings, and the way starlings and all birds will, when they're flocking, it's as though they have ESP. They just know which way to go. They don't have to, nobody calls out, hey, come over. They just seem to, in unison, know what to do. And then the starlings over Rome are really extraordinary, and there's a bunch of scientists that are studying it because they want to know, what is this communication system that's almost at the speed of light? What is it about? And so I was looking at the patterns of starlings, and I began to do these drawings over, I love the zodiac, the star system that you used to see in the New York Times for finding the constellations. And what I did is I took the birds and I made them into turbines. And so there's a series of drawings, I think there are 9 that I did. And did I, am I doing the wrong thing? Now it won't go any further. Why is that? That. Couldn't be the what? No, because there's a whole bunch. I'm not done yet. All right, can I just do it like that? Push this? Okay, all right. So this is another one. It's one of the 9. And what I was interested in about these drawings is that, now, I'm not really a great reader anymore. So when I say these things, I want you to know that I do not read Milton's Paradise Lost. I had to do it when I was an English major, and I kept falling asleep. So at one time I did try to read it. But there was this phrase that I found in Paradise Lost called, that shape, if shape it had, that shape had none. And I thought, what an extraordinary phrase. And he was describing the devil, the other, that thing that you're terrified of. And I thought, could I make a series of drawings, if shape that shape it had, if shape had none? What would that look like? So these are the starling drawings. However, now it's still, I may need some help here. Let's see. There we go. All right, it's working. And I'm going to run fast through things. This is Terminal 1, JFK. I built a piece there in the 90s, and then they wanted to redo the airport, and they wanted to actually tear the piece down and send it back to me. They gave me about 30 days. They said, we're going to send this back if you want it. So luckily, there are people who decided that they should do that, and I talked to those people, and we fought the good fight, and they relocated the piece in a much better place, which is where you can really see it when you walk in the airport. So this is the relocated Terminal 1 piece. It has a lot of the images and things that I've been talking about. It looks like an acrobatic act, a circus, a kind of amusement park, and it has things that you would find in it in this kind of big net, that if you were in outer space, and I hear that there's a lot of space junk out there, and that these things would sort of float by. So now the other thing that's interesting is when this piece was going to be torn down, the news, the media made a big fuss about it. They talked about it and talked about it. When it was resolved in a positive way, there was not one single article, which is rather curious, but that's the way the media is, I guess. So, all right, so here's Edgar Allan Poe in one of his stories about, I don't know, the whirlpool, the big pit that you get sucked down into. And the truth of the matter is that I used to read Poe before I'd go to sleep at night when I was a child. I liked to sort of scare myself for the fun of it. And these types of images, this is an early concrete piece, not really very large, but concrete, that has that sort of whirlpool-like feeling. And it was built out on a farm in Pennsylvania in the mid-70s. And this is an underground piece. Back when I was first starting, minimal art was in its heyday, and I got in earth art, and I got very interested in architecture, but architecture as art, and I began to make large-scale pieces that you could walk through and climb down into. This piece was built in '75 and rebuilt, I think in 2011 at Art Oh My, exactly the way it had been built in '75. And so some of these pieces that were destroyed originally, early work, are now being rebuilt and sort of saved. What I wanted was for you to see this very organized, kind of minimal series of wells on the surface of the earth, and then you would climb down and you would find, you would be moving in the dark, and it was sort of, you know, the rational part of your brain and then the irrational kind of more psychophysical aspect of things. And so there are these underground chambers, and you move from well to well. Some of them are blocked off, and from light to dark. And then you can look up and see the sky and climb back up. More whirling things done in, I think this was done in the 90s for a show. In this particular, this is really like an amusement park sort of whirling dish. And you couldn't really walk in the room. I'm sort of like an insurance liability, I guess, which is why, you know, no museum seems to want these things. But at any rate, I really wanted you to sense these two sort of whirling dishes, and they would move away, and then they would move towards each other and away from each other, and to have that kind of really turbulent energy. So that notion, and again, these are drawings. This is about the Kaaba in Mecca as a game board. I did this in, I think, the 80s, long before any of what's happening now existed, and I was just thinking about cities and the sort of magnetism of certain sites, and that vortex, the Kaaba, sort of floating above this vortex and playing a game around it. Stepped, whirling bowls, which is, this is at Storm King. It's about 30-some feet tall. And I'm going to just move through quickly. And you can see these images of sculpture made various places across the country. Sometimes very banal places like, you know, a high school community center. And what I started to think about with these pieces is kind of like, well, here you are in Kansas, and this thing, you come upon this thing, and you're going to school like an alien, like it's sitting there waiting for the aliens, or it is an alien. And, you know, I think a lot about aliens, and I sort of wish that they would arrive. I think we really need some other sort of conversation, badly. So these are sort of like big satellite dishes, vessel-like forms waiting to be filled, or waiting to broadcast something, waiting for somebody to turn them on. This is a parking lot at Kansas City Airport. And again, it's sort of like a big kind of vessel, black hole, musical type of form. And what I think of is when I'm getting these very banal sights, what are you going to do? And I'm thinking, well, you're coming back late at night from a business trip, and you're trying to find your car, and then you see this waiting sort of in the dark. Leonardo again, and I did a whole series of pieces in the 80s called Leonardo Swirls, and I'm sort of Reenacting them again, I think I'll do some more using the Deluge series. So, some drawings with hurricanes and whirlpools and whirling dervishes, and what I did is I love game boards. So I took a bunch of game boards and I played the game, and then wherever you can imagine what it's like to work for me. Somebody's sitting there, I'm saying, okay, throw the dice, and now, okay, it's there. And in the middle of this sort of thing, I'm there, playing a board game with them and making them sort of draw that thing and stick it there and all that kind of stuff. But I kept trying to come up with ways to make a drawing with somewhat unconsciously, have the drawing make itself. And I'm going to go try to run through to get to the last place where I want to be. So I found this. I love Stephen Hawking's Illustrated History of Time because I don't understand what he's talking about, but I love to look at his drawings. And this is one which is showing how a particle can go, how you can start one way and you can get to the same destination a number of different ways, and you can go forward and backward in time. And I started to think about a life, my life, or anyone's life at a certain point. And you get to see the story of your life if you live long enough, and you get to see those moments where you could have gone one way or another way, multiple ways of getting from one place, from the beginning to the end, so to speak. And I thought, well, I'm going to make a series of drawings. You won't know quite that that's the story behind it, but that will somehow have that quality of the possibilities of all these different pathways. And so then, many years ago, when I was a student, an undergraduate student, I found this book about, the world from above. And this was a pattern that cars made in a parking lot. They didn't know they were making it. They made it in the snow. And I kept thinking about that drawing that the cars made. I thought about that drawing literally for 40 years. What could I ever do with that? And that's what happens. Sometimes there are things they just nag you, and they nag you, and they nag you. And there are images that you can't forget. And you keep, at least I do. I've still got a few more like that. So I made a series of drawings that are called the timeline drawings. And I made them off of that sort of snow parking lot, but made it in the computer and what I would call this sort of lofting all these forms and shapes and intertwining them in different ways, but essentially it was the same sort of drawing that the cars made in the lot. And then I added things to it. And I put them on different I layered it on. For instance, this is a battlefield, and I love battlefields. And so, whatever. And then I took those, and I used some of those images for Park Avenue. And then I used some of the images for a piece that I made for Dulles Airport. And turbines and ribbons and lines of movement. So generally speaking, the drawings always lead to something that gets built. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about briefly is a real source for me, another tear in the universe. And there are these observatories in India. And this particular building I saw when I was very young. And I thought about it. I couldn't forget about it. It was sort of like Beatrice, obsessing and obsessing and obsessing, this particular building. Now, the observatory, the entire observatory, is in downtown Delhi, and there's another one in Jaipur. And what happened is that a Raj, a prince, found these incredible navigational devices that were part of the scientific revolution. And they're small, beautifully made. And what he did is he commissioned his architects to build them large so that he could sight the heavens. And these observatories were made long before the computer, and they were made very accurately so that you could find a star at a particular point, a particular time of year or the sun or whatever. They're very scientific, and to me, I'm sure that people like Frank Gehry know these observatories very well. They look very contemporary in some ways because of the curvature and the angles and all of that. But this particular building, I always thought, this is my home. This is where I want to be. And when I went to visit it, I felt like, oh, I'm home. But I'm going to leave that there, and I'll go home, but I'll carry it back. Part of it I'll carry back with me. Well, so what's curious about this is that the Raj or the Prince or whatever who commissioned these observatories, be very scientifically accurate, did so he could tell his fortune. So there's a kind of incredible mixture of science and magic. And that's one of the things I think about all the time, that interface between sort of a scientific, rational point of view and then desire and magic and wishing for things that you, or trying to control the things that you can't control. All right, this is some more of the observatory and other pictures of these. They're really like large-scale scientific instruments, architecturalized scientific instruments. They're phenomenal. And of course, in this country, because of all our insurance issues and things, you'd have all these railings around it and all that kind of stuff, like as though somebody was going to fall in. I mean, who would fall in, for heaven's sakes? But only somebody here would fall in, so that they could cash in on the insurance. But in India, you know, if you fall in, that's your problem, I'll tell you. And nobody does, at least not yet. And these particular bowls are just extraordinary as far as I'm concerned. But what happened is then I went on to Jaipur, and I went to Jaipur to see there's another observatory there, and also to see this building. And this is, and I, again, obsessed about this building for years. And it's a screen, a large-scale screen gate, and it's part of the entrance to the old city of Jaipur. And the women in the harem were not allowed to be in the world, but they could stand behind these screens and they could look out at the world that they will never be a part of. And I was standing there, and the tour guide said he wanted to take me to the souvenir shop, and I didn't want to go. And I said, please, I've come all this way. I will never get back here again. Leave me alone for 5 minutes so I can stare at this. And I'm standing there on the street, and anyone who's been to India knows how crazy it is with people all around. And I feel this tug on my blouse. And I keep thinking, oh, it's another beggar, it's another beggar. Could you just leave me alone? And then finally she kept tugging and tugging, and I turned, and there was this young woman, and she had a scar that went from her throat all the way down the center of her body, and she was showing it to me. And that was all she had to offer, nothing else, nothing. And I was there sort of looking at the most exquisite building in the world and turning to see probably one of the most tragic moments, certainly in my life. So I went home and I made a drawing, and people say, well, there's nothing will equal that moment, and certainly nothing will. There's no way that I could ever sort of deal with her pain and her anguish, or all the anguish that people like that suffer every day. But I could make a drawing. And I did that to sort of mark her, that she was alive for me, and my sort of being honored by her presence, so to speak, by meeting her and meeting her pain. Now, what I want to say at the end of this talk is that while I love to get my work, I love to win commissions, and I'm trying very hard right now to win a few. I love to have the work sold and to recover, to get out of debt for doing Park Avenue. I love to not worry about money every day and all those things, but I do not make art to sell specifically. I make art because I have to, because there's nothing else I can do, and there's no way for me to make sense of any of the things that I can't understand except to make some art. And so that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much.